Good afternoon. I'm Mariana Mancuso, and welcome. As with most of our RAM chats, mostly all of them, I'm always excited for our guests, and today's guest is no exception. Joining us today is Bill Gates. Not that Bill Gates, not the one who founded Microsoft. However, this Bill Gates is equally as riveting. He has done some incredible work in Arizona when it comes to protecting our elections. Chairman Gates is pushed back against the big lie and the sham audit conducted by the Republican-led Senate in Arizona. Bill Gates is with us today, and without further ado, I'm going to hand the show over to our National Political Director, Joel Serby.
All right. Well, thank you, Mariana, and thank you, Supervisor Gates, for being with us today. So thankful for you and for the stand that you've taken over this past many tumultuous years. For those who are watching us and joining, some of our regular viewers will probably know the story of what happened in Arizona and in Maricopa County specifically, but many won't. And so as we dive into this conversation, would love for you to just take a chance to introduce yourself, to let us know briefly how you came to be in this position, because I think that's something that in and of itself can sometimes be a story. How does someone become a civil servant and find themselves in your shoes in the middle of a firestorm? But then maybe just kind of your 5-minute version or so of what is it that took place in Arizona and in Maricopa County specifically. And then we'll kind of get into a conversation about where that's led us to. And more importantly, I think for our audience, what the implications are and what can we do about it as citizens of the United States, of our own locales, and as we continue to try to rebuild our nation in some very fragmented times. So welcome, Bill, and thank you for being with us. Would love to hear a little bit about your story, how you became involved in Maricopa County, and then a little background on where we're at today.
Well, thanks, Joel. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about kind of the unbelievable events of the last 14 months. But yeah, I'm a lawyer by training, practiced now for over 20 years as an in-house lawyer with Ping Golf. So if we have any golfers who are with us, that I'd be happy to come on and talk about that at some other time. But it's involved in worked on a lot of Republican campaigns over the years. Ironically, I was actually the leader of the Republican Party's election integrity efforts for the state of Arizona, both in 2006 and in 2008 when John McCain was our party's nominee. So I would organize, getting observers out in teams of lawyers to address any possible wrongdoing or questionable events in the elections. Then in 2009, I was appointed. There was a vacancy on the Phoenix City Council. I was appointed to the City Council, and then I subsequently ran 3 different times and was successfully elected all 3 times. So I served on the Phoenix City Council for from 2009 through 2016, including serving as the vice mayor. In 2016, there was an opening on the Board of Supervisors. The gentleman who had served in the position I'm currently in for over 20 years decided not to run again. So I resigned from the council and ran for the Board of Supervisors, was elected in 2016, was actually unopposed in 2016. And then in 2020, I ran for re-election, had a very close election against a Democratic candidate. I really represent a purple district, have about 900,000 constituents in each one of the supervisor districts, so large districts. And I was losing by 19,000 votes on election night. But as the voting continued over the next few days, I caught up and was reelected in 2020. So that's...
Let's stop there real quick and go back. So before we dive into what transpired in 2020, take me back to 2016. You're newly in the position. That in and of itself was a pretty hotly contested election. Did you imagine, what did you experience in 2016 that was there any kind of inklings that said something is not right here? I'm a little concerned about what may be coming down the pipe, or was that more of a normal kind of business as usual for you in 2016? Talk to us about that before we get to how we got where we are.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm happy you do that because 2016 and then 2018, a hotly contested midterm election, both play into this story. So we'd had the same person, a woman by the name of Helen Purcell, who'd been responsible for elections as our county recorder since the late 80s. Okay. A non-controversial figure. She's a Republican. She had a Democrat who served as her elections director. So everything moved very well, very smoothly. Then in 2016, we had the presidential preference election out here. And it was for the first time that anyone could ever remember. It was hotly contested. Okay, we had we had contested primaries on both sides. And what happened was, for the first time, the county moved to vote centers. So as opposed to you go and you vote at your precinct, they set up these vote centers, somewhere around 80 or 90 of these vote centers. Well, unfortunately, fortunately, there was a crush of interest. There was lots of interest in this race. The candidates came to Arizona, lots of attention, lots of money spent on commercials. As a result, it was kind of a mess on election day, and there were lines of up to 3 to 4 hours for people to vote. Mm-hmm. That caught everyone's attention, and unfortunately, it actually led to Helen Purcell losing her election that year because everyone remembered it, even though it really wasn't her fault. In addition, our incumbent Republican Secretary of State also lost the election. So this was the first time people really started looking at elections and starting to ask some questions. Then in 2018, we had a new recorder, a county recorder, so now a Democrat for the first time in decades, and there were lots of problems associated with that election. During the primary, there were like 60 precinct locations that didn't open on time. And there was also a lot of controversy because Republican candidates were leading on election night, such as Martha McSally in the U.S. Senate race and some other races. But then they caught up over the days as the vote continued, as the counting continued. And so, for example, that was when Kyrsten Sinema was first elected to the U.S. Senate. Because we had a Democrat county recorder, that led to a lot of calls, primarily kind of on the right side of the political spectrum, that there was something wrong here and that the Board of Supervisors needed to get involved. We had not been, even though we have statutory responsibility for running elections, we'd farmed that out to the recorder for decades. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, I was chair in 2019, and we entered into a new agreement with the county recorder to run elections collaboratively. So the Board of Supervisors actually got involved and started running the elections. And what was the first election that the Board of Supervisors was involved in running? Of course, 2020. But that really lays the predicate then for why the Board of Supervisors has been right in the middle of this whole issue with the 2020 election. In the past, we could have just sort of said, hey, go talk to the recorder. We were not involved. No, in 2020, we were intimately involved, working alongside the county recorder.
Fascinating history. So just for our viewers, most of whom are pretty educated voters, but I think it's important to lay down this kind of baseline of how the voting process works before we get now to you telling the story of what's happened over the last several months here. I've been in politics a long time, and I always thought it was a little bit comical personally when people would sit up on election night late, into the night at 1 or 2 in the morning, cheering and kind of rooting as if it was a sports match. Whereas in reality, the way that this thing works is that votes are due by a certain time and they come in. But what changes results, so to speak, is the tallying of those votes. And so just give us a little bit of a civics lesson on that. Just so I think it's an important way to talk about elections that people maybe don't always understand, because we're so used to this kind of sports culture and, he pulled ahead and no, she pulled ahead. And well, actually it's really all just in the counting and then the accounting of those votes. But just give us an 8th grade civics lesson on that piece of this process. And then I'd love to move into the Maricopa County story.
Yeah, so we have had mail-in voting allowed in addition to voting on election day since the 1990s. So whereas a lot of states were doing kind of mail-in voting for the first time in 2020 because of the pandemic, we've been doing it for years. So in 2020, 90% of the votes, about 90% of the votes were cast either by mail, so people mailed in the ballot from their home, or at an early voting site. So we had many early voting sites set up around the county. So those are coming in over about a month. Those votes are coming in and they're being tabulated. We just don't see those results at all, right? But they're being tabulated. Then on election day, about 10% of the votes came in that way. That's actually the good old-fashioned way, where people actually go into a precinct or voting center in our instance and vote on election day. So at 8 o'clock, so the polls close at 7 here, 7 p.m. So at 8 o'clock, you see a large number of votes that are reported. Those are going to be early votes that came in a week or more before the quote election day. Okay. And then over the next few hours that night, you start getting in the votes that were actually cast that day. And then over the next several days, we're continuing to count those votes. People are frustrated by that, but we explained to them, look, just on election day, people who could mail in their ballots, they go into the polling place and they drop off their vote. There's a drop-off box. So that takes several days to count those votes up, because there's on your mail-in ballot, there's a signature. So you have to sign it, because otherwise anyone could send in a ballot, say, oh, I'm Bill Gates. But I, as Bill Gates, sign it. And then at our election center, they actually compare that signature to a signature that they have on file. So that's a process that takes a while. But within about a week, you then have a complete tally. And that is because of this hybrid model that we have of early voting and election day voting.
Great summary. All right, so now into the intrigue that I think you have become famous for in many circles, but many of our viewers don't know your story and what happened in Maricopa County. So walk us through, let's just say you gave us some great backstory there, some predicate. Walk us through election day going forward, and then I think more dramatically for a lot of folks is what's happened since then. What caused you to feel that you needed to say and do what you did and stand up, and then from there we'll get into where things are at today.
Great. So again, our election went extremely well. We were working with coronavirus protocols, and it was pretty widely commented that it was a successful election. Not a lot of problems on election day. Then a few days after the election, when it became clear that President Trump was not going to win, not only the presidency, but also would lose in Maricopa County, which is fairly unprecedented for a Republican to do that, and lose Arizona. Once that happened, then we started seeing people showing up at our elections location where the votes were still being counted. As I explained to you, it went on for a few days. Pretty quickly, this turned into, as I've described it, Lollapalooza for the alt-right. You had a lot of these people who have now become famous, including the shaman, from January 6th with the headgear. He was there. Alex Jones, lots of other people. And very quickly, we can kind of, smile or chuckle a little bit about it, but it pretty quickly became a dangerous situation. And we were concerned, frankly, of people storming that building, which now, after January 6th, we understand that, that was a real possibility. So the sheriff, we worked extremely well with the sheriff. Barricades were erected, and we were able to complete the vote count.
Now, why do you think Maricopa County became that center? I mean, there were a number of counties around the country where Trump was not expected to lose. A Republican usually wins, and then he loses. So what do you think it was that was about Maricopa County specifically that caused so much ruckus there? Or was it outside forces drawing that attention? You mentioned Alex Jones. So what do you think happened there?
So I think that, again, as we were looking at the count, people understood that Arizona and Georgia, if President Trump wanted to be reelected, he had to have Arizona and Georgia. I think to some it was a surprise that he was losing. And so I think that it was the enormity of Arizona in the presidential math, And then in particular, your viewers may not know, Maricopa County constitutes 60% of the voters of Arizona.
Wow.
So this was a big deal, and would frankly, really determine, I think, where the presidential race would turn out. And in Maricopa County, it had been talked about all year that Maricopa County was one of the key counties to how this election would turn out. So once the counting was complete, at that point, then a couple weeks later, the canvass occurs. So that's when the Board of Supervisors, in any other election, it's our responsibility to vote to certify the election. And frankly, that's always been a really just a ministerial function. We meet, okay, quick report from the elections team, and we vote to approve it. It became clear to us that this was not going to be a simple process. And we started hearing from national political figures within the Republican Party, because 4 of the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors are Republicans. So there was a lot of partisan political pressure put on us to not certify the election or to delay the certification of the vote. And in fact, I, as one member of the board, I received a lot of text messages from Kelly Ward, who is the chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party. And Kelly, including on the day of the certification vote, the 20th of November, which was a Friday, she sent me a rash of text messages setting forth various reasons why we as the board should not certify the election. Oh, and by the way, I failed to mention various court cases that had gone through here in Maricopa County, in the federal courts and in the state courts, and there was no basis found for any reason to set aside the vote totals. But nonetheless, Kelly Ward continued, and she was laying out all these reasons that we should not certify the election. So I actually went through that evening. That meeting, it was on a Friday evening. It probably went for 3 hours plus. And I went through, and each one, whether it was, alleging that dead people had voted or there were questionable elements of the vote by mail or whatever, I went through and I asked these questions of our co-elections directors, and all my concerns were addressed to my satisfaction, as well as to the satisfaction of my colleagues, because we voted 5-0 that night to certify the election. But it was a bit chilling because we were in this, auditorium where it was just us due to COVID protocols, no members of the public, but we could hear people outside of the auditorium chanting, banging on drums, things like that. Now, that we know what happened to January 6th, it really is a little chilling to think about that.
So I just want to point out here and remind our viewers something that you've said, a couple things you've said. One, you've been an attorney for how many years?
25 years.
25 years you've been an attorney. So you're not coming to this process as someone who doesn't understand what it means to intently question and probe in a legal sense. Also want to remind our viewers what you said about the makeup of the group, which was, I believe you said 3 of the 5 were Republicans.
Actually, 4 of the 5.
4 of the 5 were Republicans. Okay, so in that moment, and I think this can lead us into the next part of our conversation, which is what did you think might be coming next? And as you thought about yourself as a Republican, and just so you know, and I think you know this, but our viewers also know, we're an organization, Renew America, made up of Republicans and former Republicans, governors, senators, members of Congress, cabinet members, chairman of the party, and feeling very much like there is an alternate universe among many Republicans. So talk to us about how you were feeling in that moment. You mentioned the chill in the air of those in the room, but did you anticipate the fight that was about to come? And then talk to us about the fight that has come since then.
So I knew that this was historic, and I talked about that in my remarks. I talked about the fact that my grandpa was a World War II veteran who fought in Europe, and that he fought for these rights, these democratic rights that we had. I talked about the oaths that I had taken, both as a lawyer and as a member of the Board of Supervisors, to follow the law. And even though I and my colleagues were under intense political pressure, we had to follow those oaths. And actually, that statement was clipped and frankly went viral. And so I was getting a lot of likes from, people who typically watch MSNBC. And this was a new experience for me. So I knew this was something very different. Could I have imagined what was coming January 6th? No. The fact that my colleagues and I were one vote away from being held in contempt by the Arizona Senate and possibly jailed? No. And that we would have an absurd audit that would cost over, now I think maybe $10 million. Never could have imagined what was coming. But I knew this was historic. But I honestly believed that we would again see a peaceful transition of power as we had throughout our history. And it literally breaks my heart to think about the fact now that we can no longer say that. We've now had a transition of power that was not peaceful, that involved people storming the Capitol and people dying on that day. So nothing, I never could have imagined where it was headed.
Yeah, it's just really, really tragic. And thank you again for standing up. Many of us have had those same emotions of, I myself stood up to the party and ended up, leaving the party and working at cross purposes, unfortunately, in many cases. And you really have a hard time wrapping your head around it sometimes. Let's get into the specifics of what has unfolded and more important to me as we move into kind of the second half here of our conversation, why this is important. So I want to talk about the specifics of kind of the audit process, those who believe something was wrong with the election, those who are leading that and their motivations, and then more importantly, why you think it's important to speak up, to dispel those myths, and really begin, hopefully, to try to restore some level of trust in our elections. But in that vein, there's a number of key players in Arizona, some of whom are now running for public office, Secretary of State and others, who, Fincham is one that I think of. I've done a little bit of reading on that race. Who are some of the key players, and what do you think's really driving the desire to, whether it's run the audit or just undermine the election as a whole? Do you believe that they believe it, or do you think that there are other purposes going on there?
So unfortunately, what has happened is some in our party have decided that perpetuating the big lie is good politics. And that's really what this has been about throughout, unfortunately. So Kelly Ward, who I mentioned to you earlier, head of the Republican Party, has raised a lot of money for the party off of this. Those who were involved with the audit have raised a lot of money, and candidates for office in 2022 have also done that. And we saw a lot of those people on the stage with former President Trump just this last weekend in Pinal County, which is a neighboring county. And these people, despite the fact that we have debunked all of the conspiracy theories out there, they continue to say this was a fraudulent election and say that Donald Trump won. And so, we certainly, and I'll just jump forward here a little bit, in December of 2020, we were subpoenaed. The ballots and the election machines from 2020 were subpoenaed by the Arizona State Senate. We conducted our own audits of this election. Maricopa County did, and they found no wrongdoing in the election. They found no tabulation machines ever connected to the internet, and no malware placed on computers, anything of that sort. But regardless, the state Senate continued forward and asked for these things in December of 2020. We didn't turn them over right off the bat because we were concerned that state law did not allow us to do that. So we went to court to get clarification from the courts. While that case was running through the courts, the Arizona State Senate decided that they didn't want to wait for us. So they brought an action. The state Senate president, Karen Fann, brought an action before the state Senate to hold all of us on the board in contempt. And like I said, possibly jail us. This vote would have given the Senate president the authority to jail us. The Republicans have a 16-14 majority in the state Senate. Thanks to the courage of one Republican member of the state Senate, Paul Boyer, who voted against that resolution, it failed at a 15-15 vote. So they wanted to jail us, even though we said, look, we're trying to get direction from the courts. About a month later, the court did rule. They said that the subpoena was valid so that Maricopa County could turn over the ballots and the machines. So we did that. But at this point, we already knew that this so-called audit was not the type of audit that we had conducted or the type of audit that really anyone had ever seen before. I think probably your viewers have seen the videos of the lazy Susans and the people, holding up the ballots to lights, bamboo, looking for bamboo on the ballots. This is what it turned into. It was a circus. It was run by the cyber ninjas, who are not experts, are not impartial, and in fact are now defunct. Doug Logan, who is the CEO of the cyber ninjas, has now resigned, and it is no longer a going concern. And they are literally on the run. And even though they've been required by courts to turn over documents to figure out what the heck it was that they were doing and who it was that they were taking their direction from and what communications they were having with the state Senate, they've refused to turn those documents over. So a judge is now imposing fines on them to the tune of $50,000 a day. So they claim this was about getting to the truth. They claim it was about transparency, but it was about neither. And so we at Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, we stayed pretty quiet, okay? We turned over the documents. We said we've already put on a couple audits. This doesn't need to go forward. But we basically stayed quiet until May of 2021, when the state Senate president accused our elections workers of deleting files, of basically trying to hide the truth. And that's when we, along with our newly elected Maricopa County Recorder, Stephen Richer, who's also a Republican, stood up and said, enough is enough. We said Joe Biden won Maricopa County, and you could hear the gasps in the room. Okay, that's not controversial, but it was because we were Republicans standing up. We had to tell the truth. We had to tell people that our workers had not deleted files and that, in fact, Joe Biden had won the election. And I can tell you that was a tough thing to do. And we have been attacked over and over again by other Republicans in the state. We've been attacked by former President Trump. But it's so important that we do continue to raise our voices, because this is at the base of our democracy. If we allow people to bend the truth or to simply lie about our elections, then our democracy is at risk. And let me tell you, it is. It is in Maricopa County, it is in Arizona, and it is across the United States. So that's why we stood up to this. And then once the cyber ninjas came out with their report in September of 2021, I think a lot of people were surprised that they found that Joe Biden actually got more votes in Maricopa County than even our own vote tally had found. But in addition to that, they put out a report that was full of lies. It was full of statements meant to confuse Maricopa County voters and, frankly, the American people. So then we took 3 months, our elections team, to go through in painstaking detail and refute each one of these allegations and to set the record straight. And so we were fortunate to release that report here in early January, and we conducted a 4-hour hearing where we walked through with our professionals and debunked these items systematically.
Yeah, well, again, thank you so much. And I would point our viewers to your website, Maricopa County website. All those resources are posted there, those hearings, the videos of those, the point-by-point takedowns. And again, reminding folks of a group of mostly Republicans who were put in this position to really have to ask themselves, will I tell the truth or not? We recently had on one of our RAM chats, Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan of Georgia. Jeff has, I mean, it's an eerily similar story to what you just laid out, a little bit different angle, but he was privy to and intimately involved in all of the they didn't call them necessarily audits in the initial round, but all of the deep dives into what was happening. Was there any irregularities? Were there problems? And ultimately, he shared with me, and he shares this in his book. For him, it came down to, he knew what the truth was, and he couldn't look his 3 boys in the eye going forward in his life and know that he didn't come out and tell the truth. And there's so many folks who have stood up, and yet the lie persists. And so I want to spend our last 10 minutes or so here just talking about this challenge that we face, which is there's a number of candidates running in 22 that are not only believers and promoters of the big lie, but are making it a focus of their campaign. And so, I just wonder, Bill, if you have any thoughts as someone who has been through this in a way that pretty much no one else in the country has, as you look at these races where people are making this a center of their election, as you look at folks who, even just in their conversations with their families, want to be able to talk about this and try to shape the conversation towards some level of truth, which is, again, I know is very difficult. But just talk to us about, what it is that you think we can do and say, and why it matters in these upcoming elections, in our relationships, that we do hold fast to not only the truth of what happens in elections, as you eloquently pointed out, why that's so foundational, but talk to us and our viewers about your thoughts and what you've learned about how to talk about these issues, and particularly how to combat some of the most concerning lies that are out there.
Well, Joel, it's a great topic, and I don't claim to have the answer. And the problem is that there are some people who are so set in their views. You can talk to them about facts, right, and evidence, and they just don't want to hear it. But nonetheless, we have to keep telling the story. One, for those people who do have an open mind, and I genuinely believe this, we need to do it for history. This is an inflection point in the history of our country. Mm-hmm. And those of us who are here now, those of us who lived through it, we have to tell our story. That's why we thought it was so important to put together a nearly 100-page response to the Cyber Ninja report. And if your viewers want to view that, go to justthefacts.vote. It's right there. And if you don't want to go through all those pages, there's about a 3-page executive summary. But here it is in the bottom line, and I think you probably see this in so many other places. The Cyber Ninjas claimed there were 53,000 questionable ballots in our election in 2020. That would have been more than enough to flip the election, okay? Donald Trump only lost by 10,000 votes in Arizona. But once you drill down into it, and that's what we did here, line by line, vote by vote, we found out that there were not 53,000 questionable ballots, but less than 100 out of 2.1 million. And what happened there? We will admit it. There were several people who voted for dead people. They voted dead relatives. We're talking about 30 or something like that. We've referred all those to the Arizona Attorney General. No systemic fraud. Those are one-offs. It's wrong and it's a crime, but it's not the sort of systemic fraud that's been claimed. And the second piece was 50 ballots were put through our tabulators twice. We found that out. That happened. That was wrong. It should never happen again. But you put all those together, it's less than 100 votes. And this is the most scrutinized election, maybe in the history of the world. I mean, I don't mean to engage in hyperbole, but it might be. No. So, people need to look at the facts and see what's here. All of these allegations of Italian satellites and things being manipulated, numbers being changed, our elections tabulations equipment is air gapped. And you can go, your viewers can actually go on our live stream right now and look at it. Or if they come and get a tour of it, they'll see these machines are not connected to the internet in any way. These are facts. So I say we have to keep telling people the facts. And then here's what I would say to the Republicans out there. is, I became a Republican during the time of President Reagan because we were the party that stood for the rule of law. We stood for truth. We stood for fighting against tyrants around the world. Those were the bedrocks of the Republican Party. But what are we doing now? We're spreading lies. We're not talking about the rule of law at all. In fact, many of these candidates that you're talking about who are running in 2022, their mantra is ends justifies the means, right? This is what we have to do to beat the woke left. We've got to bend the rules. That's not my Republican Party. I don't think that was your Republican Party either. So we've got to get back to basic fundamental principles, which is that we stand for truth. We stand for the rule of law and basic math too, basic math. So, many people have said to me, Bill, you ought to just leave the party. They don't want you anymore, or you should become an independent. And I refuse to do that because this fight is too important. And this is my party. This is the party of Reagan. And we've got to get back to it. But sadly, even though a few of us here in Maricopa County have raised our voices within the party, Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, not that many people have raised their voices. Many of them have remained silent. And to me, that is heartbreaking. And that's why it's not too late. It's not too late for Republicans to get behind those candidates in 2022 who believe in the truth, who believe in the rule of law. And I believe that it is a fundamental battle. These 2022 primaries are a fundamental battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. So, people can sit on the sidelines and then shake their heads when it's over, or they can get involved now. Get behind those candidates who have the courage to speak the truth. Because if they do that and they win these primaries, they're going to be very successful in 2022. We're in a great position as a party, given, in my opinion, the weakness of the Democrats right now. If we would simply talk about how Republicans stand for free markets, free enterprise, and individual rights, we could be successful. But instead, this party is hypnotized by this big lie of 2020. And as long as we remain obsessed on that, with that issue, we're not going to be successful. We're not going to be nearly as successful as we can as a party. So I approach this as a proud Republican. And I think not only is it the right thing to do, but I also think it's good politics to stop perpetuating the big lie.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Bill. And I think as we look at the landscape, and our organization is a political one, so obviously we're trying to figure out how we can be most effective in helping not only to defeat the big lie, but more importantly, to protect democracy as a whole, our foundations, to elect leaders who will uphold that and with honor and truth and justice. But as we look at that, I'm thinking back to your comment about those who have decided that this is an expedient political decision, that they can win an election based on this. And so that's one of the reasons it's so important to us, is that we have to show them that you won't win an election on these grounds. And I think a big part of who we are at Renew America and how we're engaging across the country, and we'll be heavily engaged in Arizona on a variety of fronts this cycle, is to reach out to those folks who remain committed to the rule of law, as you said, remain committed to truth, who have not bought into the big lie. They may have concerns. They may be very much in support of even many of the policies that President Trump passed. But they also understand that we must stand up against those who are simply just not telling the truth and running their campaigns on that kind of a platform. And so we want to reach those folks, and hopefully some of those folks are listening today, and that's going to be a big part of what we do. I think back to, it sounds like you're a student of history as well. I am, do a lot of reading, and two of the things that I've read recently have been around the time just before the Civil War. And then also I've been reading about the Cuban Revolution. And it's something that struck me in both cases. And you hear this in the early days of Nazi Germany as well. And I only bring those 3 points up as three very different and distinct situations historically. Cuba in the 50s, America in the 1840s and early 50s, and then Germany in the 1940s. There were a number of people, many millions in each case, who were good people, who understood at a basic level what was happening, but for a variety of cultural and political reasons, decided to be quiet, decided not to speak up. And it is my hope that by listening to stories like yours, we can understand that this is a time to speak up. This is a time to do what's right, even when it's hard. And my hope is that in Arizona, folks will continue to support the candidates that are the best candidates, and be willing to say enough is enough to those who would be big lie candidates. And in some cases, it might mean laying down some of our political ideologies. Those of us who are conservative, I consider myself conservative. There's certain things from the progressive left that we'll never swallow, and candidates that we wouldn't vote for. But there's a whole bunch of really good candidates. And when my choice is a candidate who is going to perpetuate an enormously dangerous lie and undermine the foundations of our country, or someone with whom I may have a few small disagreements on policy, but will tell the truth, I'm going with those who tell the truth every time. And so that's one of the things we're hoping to see happen this cycle across the country. And those are hard times, but they're also creating some interesting opportunities. So in that vein, just kind of maybe a parting couple of words from you as we get ready to wrap up here. Would love to hear any encouragements that you have for our viewers as they come into this cycle, and any kind of parting thoughts, and then we'll hand it back to Mariana to close us out.
Well, I think as far as encouragements are concerned, it is very encouraging to me. All the Republicans who contact me, talk to me one-on-one, who thank me for speaking up. Again, not getting a lot of other Republican elected officials thanking us publicly, but we're hearing that there are a lot of Republicans who want to hear this message, who want to get away from this, who believe in our democratic institutions. But this is it. I mean, 2022, these primaries, I would argue we've never had a more important primary as a party. So people can get out, get involved. Like you said, maybe there's candidates you don't agree with them on everything, but you agree with them on this issue. There is no issue more important than the future of our democracy, period, and the importance of our election system. And also, I would say this to you, even though we've taken all this heat in Maricopa County, we've only had one person leave our elections department, which I think is just remarkable. They understand the importance of what they do. So we talk a lot about elected officials, but I want to make sure that our viewers, that your viewers think about those elections workers. These are people who decided to spend their lives really supporting democracy. And it's unfair that they've received the denigration that they've received. It's unfair that they've had death threats. And I'm just so encouraged to see that these people have stuck around here in Maricopa County and are excited to run the 2022 election. Because I just became chairman of the board, and I stated that my number one objective as chairman this year is to run 2 great elections in 2022. And we are absolutely committed to that. And I know that elections officials across the country are committed to that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chairman Gates. And thank you, Joel, for leading such an intriguing conversation. I mean, where we go from here on integrity of our elections is just an absolutely important topic, especially given the previous elections that we have and as we look ahead to 2022 and beyond. To everyone who joined us, thank you. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to join us on February 1st for a Ram Chat with New Jersey Congressman Andy Kim. In the meantime, to stay up to date with everything Renew America Movement is doing and how you can watch our Ram Chat or even check out previous episodes, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Renew America, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/RenewAmericaMovement, and sign up on our website for all the latest information, renewamericamovement.com. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll chat soon.